Hey guys, Ruckus Gaming coming at you with another Slay the Spire Tuesday tips and tricks video. We are continuing our series on the tier list rankings of different relics, and today we're going to be hitting up the the rare relics, my mistake. There are a couple more installments coming, obviously. We've got the boss relics, we've got the event relics, and we've also got shop relics. I may decide to put those into one video or maybe two videos because those pools of relics are a little bit smaller, but I think there also might be more to say, especially about those boss relics, so it may depend. I don't want these videos to stretch on too long. One other thing before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to all the new subscribers. I think I went a couple months getting 1 or 2 subscribers here and there, and then I just had a flurry of like, I don't know, 6 or 7 in 2 days, which is not really a lot, but it felt nice to have a little boost right there. But I don't have any illusions about getting 1 million subscribers or anything like that. This is just a hobby I like. I've got a lot of ideas for videos I want to make, and I also think that making these videos and talking through things has also made me a better player and helped me improve my skill. So whether or not I'm getting a lot of subscribers, I'm going to keep doing this, but if you enjoy it, I'm glad to have you here, glad to have support. So subscribe, drop a like, comment, all that good stuff. But without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. And our first relic is going to be Bird-Faced Urn. This relic gives you 2 HP heals every time you use a power card. If we were playing Defect only, this would be S tier. You get something like a White Noise. Is that the one for common? Not common, but for creating a power. Or you get, obviously, Creative AI. You can stall and heal to full in every single fight, no matter what. This cannot generate a self-repair or other healing cards, but the fact that the power itself heals you can get you back to full. Otherwise, I think it's great. There are a small number of decks that do not really rely on powers. You know, like silent discard decks don't really need to scale if you can just go infinite. Obviously, watch your infinite decks. Maybe you're doing like a weird Defect deck where you're just kind of like juggling orbs with recursion and you don't really need a lot of powers, but in general, powers are going to be your main form of scaling, and making them better, giving you heals, encouraging you to play those powers, encouraging you to stall out a fight as long as possible. Those easy hallway fights can net you a lot of healing if you're able to really draw them out and make the most out of this relic. So I think that Bird-Faced Urn is a very, very useful thing to have. Not quite S tier, but very, very close. Alright, next up is Calipers, and it is going at the top of A tier. I think Calipers has become kind of a meme. I think I say it all the time. Hey, where's Calipers? A lot of decks can generate a great amount of block in a given turn. The problem is those turns that you're able to generate that block aren't always when the enemy is attacking. If they're debuffing you, it doesn't matter if you can get 60 block or whatever it is, you know? There's no point in exhausting everything with Corruption, Feel No Pain if you're not going to actually have it when you need it. So Calipers is a fantastic tool. It's basically a free barricade as long as you can create 15 more block than the enemy will do to you. But I think there are plenty of opportunities in just about every single fight, with 1 or 2 small exceptions like Book of Stabbing that is just always attacking, where you're going to have a small break and you're going to have a chance to bank some block with Calipers. And it is a run-winning relic, in my opinion. The problem is it is a rare relic, and it just doesn't show up as often as you want. You always say, where's Calipers? Where's Calipers? You want it so much, but I think the amount of chances you're going to see it in situations where you want it is not as quite as high as you'd like. Maybe it could be an S tier relic. Perhaps if it were uncommon, it would be too overpowered. But I'll keep it at A for now. Maybe we'll switch it around later. Who knows? All right, next up we have Captain's Wheel. That's going to be a B tier relic. 18 block is certainly nothing to shake a stick at. It saves you a lot of energy and allows you the ability to just go all out on the third turn no matter what for the most part. Does fall off a little bit as you get deeper into a run or higher into a run, but still a very solid amount of block. Nothing to sniff at, nothing to raise your nose up at. Situationally can be quite good depending on the fight. Obviously there's probably a lot of turn 3s where it's going to be giving you 18 block and the enemy's debuffing or buffing, and you don't really get any value out of it unless you have something like Calipers. There you go. But still very solid relic. You don't get excited to see it. You know, you don't really use it in the same way you use something like Bird-Faced Urn. It's a passive thing. Once per combat, flat bonus. Not an exciting relic, but certainly a very useful one in many different situations. So I think it's a solid B tier relic. Alright, next up we're going to have the first Ironclad exclusive with Champion's Belt. Every time you grant one vulnerability to an enemy, you will also grant one weakness. That is going to be the tippy top of B tier. I feel like I might be undervaluing this. It is something I don't see a lot in runs, even though I do play quite a bit of Ironclad. It also seems like the weakness is useful, but except for some very specific fights, the weakness is not the main draw, or it's not the main benefit. You know, Ironclad loves vulnerability. It loves to end those fights quickly. Killing is Ironclad's block card, so weakening an enemy is nice, but it's not necessarily what he's built around. It's just a little extra bonus that'll keep you alive a little bit longer, so if you're struggling, it'll help out. And again, not necessarily a super exciting relic. I think Ironclad would benefit from a few more cards that generate vulnerability. I think he only has like 4. He's got Thunderclap, Bash, Shockwave, and I feel like there's one more I'm forgetting, but that goes to show you the quality of it. Shockwave is a fantastic card. Thunderclap, situationally alright. Bash is obviously your starter, so you're always going to have some vulnerability, but the number of Uppercut, there you go, Uppercut. No, that actually is a really good card, but that already gives you the weak. I guess this is like a free upgrade to Uppercut. You always want to upgrade that Uppercut, get those 2 stacks of vulnerability and weaken around, just because it is a lot more useful than only 1 turn. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is drastically affecting how I play Ironclad. It is a nice bonus. It's mostly kind of passive. I guess I do choose to play vulnerability cards, but you're probably going to be playing them anyway. I don't think there's a lot of times you look at Uppercut in your hand, you're like, nah, I don't want to Uppercut. It would have to be, you know, you've already got lethal or something where it doesn't matter, but most of the time when you get an Uppercut, you're going to play Uppercut. All right, let's move on. Next up is Karen's Ashes, and this is going to go middle of A tier. There you go. This does 3 damage to all enemies? All enemies, that's correct. 3 damage to all enemies every time you exhaust in a card. So it's very much like Mercury Hourglass, but with a much better trigger. It is not once per turn, but it is every single time you exhaust a card, which for Ironclad is going to be a lot. I think when you have a corruption deck going, Karen's Ashes is going to be so fun, and those enemies are just going to melt especially if you've got other cards that support it, that really encourage you to exhaust cards, like a Feel No Pain, like a Dark Embrace. Exhaust is clearly the main strategy for Ironclad, in the same way that like Draw Discard is for the Silent, or Orbs, or Stance Dancing. There are so many cards. I think nearly a third of Ironclad's cards say exhaust in some manner on them, whether it's exhausting that card or something like a True Grit where you exhaust another, or a Burning Pack where you exhaust another. So even if you're not running a Corruption deck, just the sheer number of cards that have exhaust on them for Ironclad will provide a great amount of value. It's AoE damage, and it's fun to use, I think, because if you've already got some cards that exhaust, it just makes your deck better. And if you don't have cards that exhaust yet, this really encourages you to take them, and I think it adds a lot of great value. So, A tier relic in my opinion. Next up, we have the Watcher exclusive relic, Cloak, Clasp. At the end of your turn, gain 1 block for each card in your hand. And we're going to follow tradition in these videos, and we're going to take a Watcher block relic and throw it directly into F tier. Absolute garbage. I think there is no situation in which the Watcher is drawing a lot of cards and not playing them. If you've got Rushdown, if you've got Scrawl, things of that nature, you know, a Cut Through Fate, the Watcher has a lot of different ways to get energy, mainly through Stance Dancing. And you're going to be playing those cards. You're going to end up with a couple in hand, and this is going to be 3 to 5 block, which is okay, but as I've said numerous times in the past, the Watcher doesn't really want to be blocking. This is very much raising, not even the floor, this is raising the basement of the Watcher. There are not a lot of situations where this is going to be providing any great value. The biggest danger that Watcher has is getting caught at the wrong moment in Wrath and taking double damage and dying. And in that case, 3 to 5 block is not going to save you when you're taking, you know, 20, 30, 50, 70 damage in a single turn. It's just completely useless in my opinion. And that's just how it is. I don't know why they keep trying to force the Watcher to block. It's never going to be the attractive or interesting or fun option. I think Watcher relics should be leaning more into what the Watcher wants to do. She's already so overpowered and unbalanced. You may as well just keep going wacky with it. I almost think of the Watcher as like a downfall mod character, just because there are a few cards you can always take every single run and you win. There's not a lot of incentive for you to really get creative with the Watcher. You can obviously just not pick those cards, and you can try to do a pressure points deck or something like that, but there's not a lot of support in her deck to do that. There's just pressure points and trying to play it as often as possible with as many copies as possible. It's a challenge, but not really like a fun one, because if you don't get it, you just can't do it. So the path to creating a non-infinite deck that is super powerful is there. You know, you've got your divinity decks. Those can be pretty fun, especially if you've got like a Ragnarok in there. Pretty easy to win with that. But again, not going to be blocking. You're just going to be getting into divinity as soon as possible and then playing your big blapper. And that's all you want to do. You're not going to be blocking. That's enough on Cloak Clasp. Next up, we have Dead Branch. And that's going to be right under Calipers. This might be a little bit of a hot take, not being S tier. I think everyone sees Dead Branch and like, oh my god, Dead Branch. But I think there are certainly circumstances where Dead Branch is not that useful. I think outside of Ironclad, the other characters don't have very much exhaust to work with. You've got shivs and some rare cards on the Silent. You've got some rare cards for the Defect and Watcher, but those are not going to have the same kind of value that they do for Ironclad, who's just exhausting everything all the time, especially with Corruption. Also, if you've got Runic Pyramid in your hand, or in your deck row, your Relic row, Dead Branch is absolutely garbage, and it is a skip. You know, you don't want random garbage cluttering up your hand. For Snecko, it can be alright, especially if you do have Corruption on Ironclad. Corruption, Snecko, Dead Branch is very, very powerful, but the main drawback to Dead Branch is the fact that you're going to be adding a lot of nonsense into your deck, and the first shuffle of your deck, the first time you cycle that, is going to feel like your deck, and it's going to do what you want it to do. And then when you get into that second cycle through your deck and you're drawing random clashes and you're drawing a bunch of weird junk, it's just like, okay, maybe this is not so great, because now I have run out of my base deck and I've just got kind of this silly stuff. Dead Branch is great in decks that scale quickly and can play a lot of cards with lots of energy, but there is that danger if you don't end something quickly enough, you're gonna kind of run out of steam. So for that reason, I say it is not quite S tier, but very close. It's an A tier relic for me. Still excited to see it though, still love to see it. I think outside of having a Runic Pyramid, I'm always going to take a Dead Branch, just because it's fun. Even if I know it's maybe not the best choice. Next up is Duvu Dao, which grants you 1 strength for every curse that is in your deck. C tier. I think the obvious benefit to this is this will already work with your Ascender's Bane. So this is like a Vajra, in that as soon as you get it, as long as you're playing A10 or higher, it will provide something to you for free. On the flip side, it does also mean that if you get a curse and remove it, you will be losing that strength. So you are somewhat incentivized not to remove curses, which is an interesting situation to be in. I think generally speaking, curses are bad enough that you don't really want to take the risk of having them, despite the obvious benefits that they may confer, you know, getting a free relic from an event in exchange for a curse. Normally might be okay if you've got a shop coming up and you can get rid of that curse quickly, but it's not enough to just say, hey, here's 1 more strength, why don't you just hang on to this curse? So in some very specific instances, it might be pretty takeable. You've got a lot of exhaust, you've got a lot of draw or discard, something like that. I think on the Silent and Ironclad, this is the most doable. But Defect probably doesn't do very well with it, and it doesn't want to do well with it. It is not a strength-based character for the most part. Even Claw decks don't scale with strength, they scale by playing Claw. And Defect doesn't have any way to scale strength except reprogram and beam cell. So adding strength to the Defect is not like a big deal. And Watcher is just the Watcher. 1 strength will help you end things more quickly, but you're already ending them pretty quickly anyway. So For my money, it's a very average at best relic. I think you could even make arguments to drop this a little bit lower, but 1 strength is okay on most characters. And if you've already got a curse in deck playing on A10 or higher, you can just take it and be like, fine. It's 1 curse I already have, so I may as well get a bonus for having it. That's how I look at Duvu. I'm not really going out of my way to accept more curses just because I have it, though. Next up is Emotion Chip, the only defect exclusive relic in the rare pool. I'm not really sure why they screwed over the defect so badly with rare relics in the exclusive department. That being said, this is a pretty solid relic, and I'm going to throw it near the top of B tier. Maybe I don't play defect enough. I think the fact that it generates, or not generates, but triggers all of your orbs, not just the first one like loop, but all of them. It is very, very nice. Doesn't really matter a lot for things like energy maybe, but it's nice for the darkness to scale that faster. Extra block, extra damage. So the downside is it does mean you need to take damage. And if you can do that, if you can miss full block by 1, if you take 1 damage to trigger all your orbs, I mean, that is a great deal. There's no reason you shouldn't be doing that. But most of the time, especially as you get higher in the Spire, those attacks are going to be bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're going to lose the ability to nearly full block without over blocking. So I think there is a little bit of a danger that this can fall off during a run. As you scale higher and as the enemies scale higher, at some point you're going to be generating way more block than you need a lot of the time, or they're going to be dealing way more damage than you can block. So it's average in my opinion, but when it's good, it's really, really good. So I think that is kind of the definition of B tier, in that it's situational, can be great, can be something you don't get a good use out of depending on, you know, the deck you're running and your position in the Spire and the combat it is. All right, next up is Fossilized Helix, which is simply the same as 1 buffer stack. It prevents the first instance of damage each combat, and that's going to be our first S tier relic. I think that we often have those times where we end up just missing full block and we lose the Helix buffer stack to like 2 damage and it feels bad, but I don't think that's how we should be judging this relic. I think you got to look at this as, hey, this will completely negate the big heart attack all by itself. One of the single hardest turns in the game, and this completely solves that problem. When you're playing at high ascension levels, when you're going for heart kills in general, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to solve that fight far into the future while also solving the problems you have now. And Helix is a great way to do that. There are lots of enemies with big attacks, including the heart, and plenty of elites along the way where you don't want to be taking damage, and you also don't want to be blocking. You know, if you're going against something like Big Head or Time Eater or whatever, like, you kind of want to end those fights as quickly as you can. You don't want to do lots of blocking to give them chances to scale up. But no matter how large the attack is, you have this safety net, this insurance of, hey, I don't have to worry about this big attack at all. I can do whatever I want. I can build up some scaling with my powers. I can do lots of damage. I can play important skills like Apotheosis or whatever it is that's really going to turn that deck on and make it easier to finish without wasting 2 to 3 energy blocking or half blocking a big attack. That is the true value of Fossilized Helix. S tier relic. Next up is Gambling Chip, and this is going to be another S tier relic back to back. Absolutely fantastic relic. Every combat in the game is going to have a turn 1 guaranteed. If you can have a great turn 1 and end that combat before it ever gets to turn 2, you're still going to get the full benefit of this relic. It's not like a captain's wheel where if you don't even get to turn 3, it doesn't do anything. You always get the value on the best and most important turn of any combat, and that is extremely important. How many times have you been running a corruption deck on Ironclad and you bottom deck it, or you bottom deck your barricade, or you bottom deck biased cog, or whatever is the key to your deck working the way you want it to? This is very, very useful for getting that into hand more quickly. Obviously, when you've got bigger and bigger decks, it's going to be harder to do, but that means you should be taking more draw. If you can get the draw into your hand on first turn, that will give you a better chance of getting to that corruption or barricade or biased cog or echo form or whatever. So, Gambling Chip is great. Absolutely love it. Super excited to see it anytime, any deck. It just makes your deck work. S tier. All right, next up is Ginger, which is a passive bonus that prevents you from ever being weakened again for the rest of the run. I'm going to drop this into C tier. Now, I think that might be kind of undervaluing the effect that it has. I think not being weakened is fantastic most of the time. Obviously, some decks don't really rely on physical attacks, but still, it is extremely, extremely annoying to be weakened, even if you're playing a character that is not strength-based. Just because, hey, I used to be able to kill you in 2 hits with basic attacks. Now it takes 3. Now it takes a whole more energy. So not being weakened is a big deal, I think. It's going to make you 25% more powerful on the turns where you would be having some trouble. That being said, though, it is passive. It is something that is situational based on how the enemy will debuff you. Obviously, not all enemies are going to debuff you and weaken you. They might give you vulnerability. They might give you frail. It's good for the heart. I think anything that protects you from getting debuffs from the heart is good. You know, if it's a clockwork, a souvenir, if it's a panacea, the more of that you can have will make the heart fight easier. But in general, it's a passive benefit. It doesn't change how you play. It is just making you a little bit better at whatever you're doing naturally. So, in that sense, it's going to be a C tier relic for me, just because of my own personal play style and how I value things. I like to use relics, such as, a gambling chip, where I can very specifically choose what I want to do and how I want to use it. There's no real choice with Ginger. There's nothing that's going to say, hey, maybe I should, start picking different cards because I have Ginger now, or maybe I should start changing my path and getting more aggressive because I have Ginger now. I don't think that's going to happen. It doesn't really change your decision making or your play style at all. It doesn't encourage behavior, in my opinion. It's just a nice passive bonus, and I think there's a couple of those that we're going to see here in C tier. you can probably guess already what those are. Next up is Golden Eye, one of the Watcher exclusives. Every time you scry, it will allow you to scry 2 more cards as well. I actually really like this relic. I think scry is a super powerful thing to have, but just because it's on the Watcher and because it is not directly helpful in the most powerful and easily win running deck type, that being a small Watcher Infinite, I gotta throw it in D. There are some decent scry cards for the Watcher. I like Cut Through Fate. I like Third Eye. I even like Lucky Coin, or whatever that one is, the 0 cost tack where you scry like 1. I like scry. I think scry helps you take those nasty, yucky strikes and defends and passes them straight to the discard pile so you can get to the good stuff. I think in some circumstances it might help you get into a place where, you know, you're trying to build a Watcher Infinite, but you're not quite there yet. You don't have all the pieces, and you still have a few too many cards. You know, maybe this is, you know, the middle of Act 2. You just haven't gotten the removes yet. It's almost kind of like removes in some way, but really won't reduce the total size of your deck. So if you're not pretty close to 10 or thereunder, it's not actually going to make you infinite, but you're going to feel a little bit closer because you're getting more quality cards more consistently. But at the end of the day, I just think most of the time when you're playing Watcher, scry is going to distract you from getting into that kind of prime state that Watcher wants to be in. If you start taking a lot of scry, I think it's going to clog up your deck and make it worse at the end of the day. Next up is Giria, which allows you to lift for a bonus of 1 strength at a campfire up to 3 times in a run. I'm going to throw this straight into D tier. And the number one reason, aside from the fact that not all characters really want strength, aside from that, is that it is really giving you a conflicting set of priorities when you get to campfires. I think your number one priority when you get to a campfire is to upgrade. Your second priority is to heal as necessary. Third priority is that red key if you don't. And then fourth is Giria. If I can do any of those 3 other things, maybe it's kind of like 3A, 3B with red key. But at the end of the day, there's going to be one fire where you need to take that red key if you want to go to the heart. If you're not going to the heart, maybe Giria is a little higher, but the main reason this is a D tier relic is because it is making those fires a little bit harder to use effectively if you're raising your strength. Like, there's almost no situation in which I would rather raise strength than upgrade a card, unless I've already got a lot of upgrades. Maybe I've got like a toxic egg or something like that, so I've already got a ton of upgrades. Maybe I've got an apotheosis, I've got a ton of upgrades. In those cases, yeah, sure, Giria is nice, and I like the bonus strength. But most of the time I see Giria, I'm like, okay, great. I'm literally never going to use this because I want to upgrade this card. I want to upgrade this card. I want to upgrade that card. And I want the red key. And I've got 2 fires in this act that I really have to use to do those multiple things. And I'm going to have to prioritize. And Giria is just always going to be on the bottom. And that's how that is. You're going to see this a couple more times with some of these rare relics that involve campfire choices. You may have an idea of what those will be. Next up is Ice Cream, and this is easily the absolute top of the rare relics in my opinion. Every time I see Ice Cream, I'm like, okay, I win now. And it's that simple. Being able to store energy that you don't need on a turn you don't need it, and to use it later on a turn when you do, is just incredible. And if you have even a little bit of draw, it is absolutely amazing. There are so many ways that this can be busted wide open on every single character, whether it's, you know, using a Sentinel, using double energy, using Tactician, using Plasma Orbs, using your Stance. All of the characters can make extremely fantastic use of this relic, and it adds immediate power to every kind of deck. There is no deck that doesn't want more energy. So, for that reason, Ice Cream, top of S tier. Nothing is higher. Nothing grants you the kind of power and flexibility. And it's fun to use, you know. How many times do you have kind of a weird turn where you've played one or two high cost cards and now you've got one energy left and you don't need to do anything, so you play a defend. Like, okay, well, I've got the energy, so I'll use it. Now you don't do that. Now you can say, hey, I'm going to play less cards this turn. Maybe you've already got a pocket watch or something like that, where playing less cards is going to help you out. Pocket watch Ice Cream would be an absolute dream. I would love that combo on anybody. All right, next up is Incense Burner. I'm going to throw that right above Fossilized Helix, because this can trigger more than once per combat. If you're going kind of slow, stalling it out, if it's a longer fight, you can get more than one use out of this. Not quite full block, but I mean 1 damage. I think most decks can handle blocking for 1 damage in a turn. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. And it's great because you can play around with it. You can use this to set up really easy turns in the future. You know, if you're going into the heart, you say, hey, I want to end Shield and Spear on turn 3 or 4, so I can block one of those big heart attacks and solve one of the biggest problems in your entire run. Very much in the same way that Fossilized Helix allows you to solve a lot of big attack turn problems. And the simple fact that you can get more than 1 use out of it per combat, potentially. You can set it up to solve future combats if you don't need it this one. Incredibly flexible, incredibly powerful. All characters, all decks benefit from it. If you see this, you should be very, very happy. And if you have the skill, which I'm not even saying I do, I think I do not make fully good use of this, but you watch a lot of streamers who get a lot of use out of this. And I think it can be one of those things where if you choose to really slow down and think about it, think about the next combat, think about, you know, what's going on situationally, contextually, being able to pre-plan a turn ahead of time, several floors perhaps even, is very, very powerful. So, S tier relic in my opinion. Next up we have Lizard Tail, which is like a free 50% HP revive 1 time per run. That is going to be the top of C tier for me. Obviously, it is not something you really want to be using, and the fact that if you use it, it's gone is very much a consideration. It is like a better version of Fairy in the Bottle. So there's no situation where you're like, this is bad. But you're also saying, all right, if I just died to, you know, Big Head or Reptomancer or Book of Stabbing or Nemesis or Transient or whatever, you were in a bad spot before. Is healing that 50 HP or 50% HP going to fix whatever that problem was? Probably not. I mean, there are situations where, you know, you get bad draw on RNG, you take a lot of damage in a hallway fight, and you go into an elite and you die. And it's not necessarily the deck's fault, quote unquote, but generally speaking, if you die in a run, getting half of your health back is not necessarily going to fix whatever the problem is. It's going to give you a second chance to fix it. But there are a lot of times, I think, that you use this and then you end up dying very soon thereafter anyway, because there was something critically wrong within the deck that this does not fix. Now, if you are in the heart fight and you've been able to save this all the way up to the heart fight, then yeah, this can be great. This can be something that actually does give you just enough time to get that kill. I don't think you want heart fights to go on much longer than 8 turns. So if you're, you know, on turn 4 or 5 and you die, this can give you those 3 more turns that you need to kill. But generally speaking, I think it's just something I see and I'm like, well, this is nice insurance, but I really would have liked something that would have made my deck better. You know, maybe a different relic that adds something like free healing to your powers, like Bird-Faced Urn. Maybe you would have liked to see something like Ice Cream, obviously. So there's a little bit of lost opportunity cost here with this relic in that it doesn't make you immediately more powerful, which is the number one thing you want, especially from these rare relics that start to have more and more effects. Getting a C, D, F tier relic from a rare pool is like, wow. You gave me Giria instead of Gambling Chip? Are you kidding me, dude? Why? Same thing I feel about Blizzard Tales. Like, okay, it's fine, but I really would have liked something else. Next up is another Ironclad exclusive, Magic Flower. This increases the effectiveness of healing in combat by 50%. That's going to go right above Bird-Faced Urn. This is going to affect things like Burning Blood. This is going to affect things like Reaper. This will affect things like healing potions. This will even affect things like Toy Ornithopter. As long as you are healing within combat, this will give you 50% more healing. I love it. I think it encourages you to take more cards that heal, like a Reaper. It allows you to make really nice use of your starting relic. Makes it even better, 9 HP per combat as opposed to 6. Seems like a small difference, but over the course of a run, it can really add up. Especially, you know, you go into an elite fight, you lose lots of HP, but once you get back into those simple hallway combats against the normal enemies, where you have a lot more ability to preserve HP, to stall, to build up HP, then that's great. It allows you to be more aggressive. HP is a block card. So Magic Flower does change how you play, I think. I think it makes it easier to heal so you can be a little bit more aggressive with pathing. Makes you a little bit more aggressive with your card choices. And it encourages perhaps, you know, more potion use depending on what kind of potions you have. And I think that's good. Sometimes people kind of sit on potions, saving them for situations where like, oh man, this is the perfect situation for this potion. And then they kind of have a bad elite fight halfway through Act 2 and they die with a potion in their belt. And then you've just lost the value of that potion. You've wasted it by not using it. Obviously, there are potions that you do want to kind of bank and save for specific fights. But most of the time, I think using potions is good and should be done a little bit more frequently. That's something I'm trying to do in my own playthroughs, is trying to use my potions and make better choices about saving them or not saving them. And Magic Flower can be a factor in that decision, though it's not just potions, it's all manner of things. So, I like Magic Flower a lot. I'm an Ironclad player, so just kind of fits my play style. If you're not really an Ironclad player, then maybe it's not that important to you. Alright, next up is Mango. 14 free HP for nothing. And I'm actually going to break tradition on this one. And I'm not going to put a free HP relic into F tier. This one is going into D tier. 14 HP is nothing to sniff at. I think this has obviously the highest benefit apart from Waffle from the HP relics. And it can kind of save you from maybe earlier, greedier choices where you trade max HP for a rare or a relic or upgrades. And it can be essentially like getting those for free because you're getting the HP back. That being said, I think it is very, very, very situational, and max HP is not really very high on the list of determining factors for winning a run. Maybe you get to the heart and you win and you have less than 14 HP left, and you could say, hey, Mango saved me. I don't think I'd agree, but if you want to look at it that way, sure. Mango saved you because you had less than 14 HP left at the end of a heart fight. But there's probably a lot more you could have done to save 2 or 3 more HP and had more than 14 HP. So, not a win running relic, not super interesting, flat bonus, but it can make up for some greedy choices, or allow you to make greedy choices later in the run if you pick it up early. But not super interesting. Next up is Old Coin, which just gives you 300 gold. That's going right at the bottom of B tier. It's nice. It's really good. It gives you money to spend in your next shop. I love going to shops. I like removing, and the amount of things that you can do at a shop is incredibly varied, whether it's getting an attack or a potion or a skill or a relic or whatever. Like, having money that you can spend any way you like is incredibly useful for any character. But that being said, it is a one-time bonus, essentially. If you don't spend it at the first shop, you're going to spend it at the next one. So it's not going to necessarily win you a run unless you get like a crazy shop. But even then, 300 gold isn't a lot. That's, like 1 rare relic, maybe 2 rare cards if you're lucky, a potion or 2. Like, early on in a run, I think, is when it's got its most value. When you've got your starter deck, when you don't have anything in your potion belt, when you haven't gotten any removes yet. This is a relic you really like to see to improve your starter deck quickly. But once you get a little deeper into a run and you start down a certain path, whatever kind of deck you're making, whether it's a Shiv deck or a Frost deck or whatever it is, the value is going to kind of decrease from this over time, because say you're running a Shiv deck and you really want to see an accuracy. So you start hitting up all these shops. You're never guaranteed to see an accuracy. And I think most people are unwilling to skip out from spending money at a shop and try visiting another shop later. I think you are very very interested in spending money as quickly as possible to make your deck better as quickly as possible. Same thing I said about holding onto potions forever and then dying with them. You don't want to be sitting on 500 gold and dying with it. I think it's best to be spent quickly, and that means shops early give you more options. You haven't really decided where your deck is going yet. You still have the ability to go in multiple different directions with it depending on what you see. Whereas later shops often just don't really give you anything that's going to be useful. You've already got your potion belt full. You've already got your deck pretty much handled. Maybe you're looking for one or two things to really round it out, but if it's not that, then you may not be willing to spend money on something that you don't think will be useful to you, obviously. So for that reason, I say it's a B tier relic. You're not mad about it, but also, depending on where you are when you get it, you could be like, oh wow, this does nothing. This is the last relic I've got before the heart. And, you know, you got it from Shield and Spear, so what are you going to do with it? Or you're not going to the heart. You're in Act 3, and you're just trying to get that Ascension win, and there's no more shops left on your path before the Act 3 boss. Like, okay, well, thanks, I guess. I'll just enjoy having the gold. Next up, we have Peace Pipe, which is another one of those campfire relics. It allows you the option to remove a card as opposed to resting, healing, upgrading a card, or taking a red key. Similar to Giria, I'm going to drop that in D tier unless you are really trying to force some kind of infinite, unless you've got a really nasty curse like Normality in your deck that absolutely must be removed ASAP. This is going to be very similar to Giria in that it is always kind of on the bottom of my priority list when I hit campfires. Campfires are extremely beneficial. One of the most important rooms for improving your deck, and making that choice harder by adding a low priority choice to the list of things to do is just not very valuable. Obviously, it can be useful, but I think the number of situations where you're like, you know what? No, I will not rest. I will not upgrade. I will remove a card is kind of low. You have to be in a pretty good situation already. Kind of a high roll relic, in my opinion, in that if you've low rolled and you're struggling, this is not going to help you out. If you have high rolled and you're doing great, then this will help you win more. This is a win more relic, I guess. So by itself, I don't think it's going to save you. In the unlikely circumstances that you have absolutely something you must remove right now, it can be great. If you're trying to get that Watcher Infinite and you don't have the money for removes, this can be great. But aside from those very specific sets of circumstances, you're just not going to be choosing to remove over upgrading or resting. I highly doubt. Next up is Pocket Watch. If you play 3 cards or less on any given turn, on your next turn you will draw 3 additional cards. This is going right up into A tier, somewhere like that. This is a great relic to have on just about any character, especially characters that want to play lots of high cost cards like Ironclad, some defect decks, you know, with the Echo Form, with your creative AIs, with your buffers that, you know, have high cost powers that are very central to whatever you're wanting to do. I think this is great. Even on characters that like low cost cards or decks that like low cost cards, this is still very useful because say you're fighting an enemy who's not attacking on this turn, you don't need to be blocking. You play an attack, you play a power, and then you say, hey, I've got an extra card that I don't really need to use, so I'm not going to play it. Next turn will just be even better. I'll get more draw on my next hand when I will probably need it more than this hand. And if there's zero cost cards, then even better, because then you can just play more cards. You don't always have to be using this relic. I think a lot of times there are certain deck types like a Silent Shiv deck where you might be playing a lot of cards. You know, a discard deck on the Silent where you're playing 20 cards per turn. You're like, wow, well, I'm always playing a lot of cards, so this isn't useful. But even in those decks, I think there are plenty of circumstances where it can be useful and it will make your next turn even better. So just about 95% of the time, I'm very happy to see this. And I think a very, very small percentage of the time, late in a run, if you've already got a deck that's playing lots of cards consistently per turn, no matter what, you might say, oh, this isn't that useful. But for the most part, I would say this is A, and very potentially I think you could make an argument for S tier as well. Probably S tier, but let's just put it in A. I like to have a little bit of separation. I don't want everything to be A and S tier. Next up is Prayer Wheel, a relic that grants normal combats an extra card reward. And it is different from Question Mark in that it is not just one extra card in the reward. It is a full second card reward. So you're looking at 6 cards potentially per combat, up to 4 if you do, or up to 8 total if you have Question Card already. I'm going to put this in C tier. I've been burned by Prayer Wheel before. If you get it early, it looks really great. And that you say, hey, I can get a lot of card rewards from these early act combats and these easy pool fights, and I can improve the quality of my deck really quickly. And that is true. However, I have also gotten this rare relic from the Niao bonus, and I've had 30 card decks before I got to the Act 1 boss. And when you're adding that many cards that quickly, I don't think you get a very good sense for how the deck feels when it plays. For my own play style, I feel that I am not necessarily super analytical. I do play very intuitively a lot, and I play by feel. I often think about, how does this deck feel? I feel like I'm not blocking enough. I feel like I need more draw. And maybe my feelings are wrong. But if you're adding a lot of cards quickly and you're not playing many combats, you're not able to get a very good sense for how a deck feels. And in your mind, you may be thinking, oh, this card and this card work really well together, and when I add them, there's going to be great synergy, and it's going to work great. But it may not actually play out that way, and you might end up bloating a deck with a lot of early commons, which is really bad to do. I think you want to see this perhaps a little bit later in a run, when you have a decent start on your deck, but you still have a little bit of flexibility for the specific direction you want to take it. You're not going to be over tempted by lots of commons, and you will have the ability to skip more comfortably and not regret it because you are being a little bit pickier. You are searching for particular cards. You're looking for powerful rares. You may be looking for a particular skill that will really add a lot of value, like you're looking for an entrench to really make your barricade body slam deck fucking slap. So it can add a lot of great value, but it also has a very real downside. And I think it could be a slippery slope, because once you start taking a lot of cards, you may quickly find yourself in a situation where you've got lots of cards too quickly, and the idea you had in your head is not really going to match the reality of how that deck plays out, unfortunately. Next up is the shovel. It allows you to dig for relics at campfires, and just like all of the other campfire relics, I'm going to throw that into D tier. I know I literally just put out a dig daily video, but I don't think you should be judging the value of a relic necessarily based on daily run videos. And I think it falls into the same category as Giria into Peace Pipe. It can be a lot more fun to use than Giria or Peace Pipe, and for that, I think I will put it over them. If you do dig into something really crazy like a dead branch or an ice cream or whatever, like, it feels incredibly amazing to use. But in general, you're probably just going to be picking up a weird random relic, and you're going to be missing out on a higher value target, like upgrading a card that is central to your deck or healing when you desperately need it. It's basically a meme. This is the claw of relics, I feel like. You know, it's funny to play with, but it is not exactly the highest percentage strategy to be digging at every single site instead of making those very important upgrades. Unfortunately, got to be a D tier relic for me, though it is very fun to use. Next up is a silent exclusive, the Specimen. Anytime an enemy dies from poison, you transfer that poison to a random second enemy. This is going to be D tier for me. It's basically just a worse corpse explosion. And I think that when you're trying to judge cards or relics, one important question you should be asking yourself is, does something else already do this? And does it do it better? And there's a very easy one-to-one comparison with the Specimen and Corpse Explosion. I don't think there's any point in which you would look at Corpse Explosion and Specimen and be like, yeah, let's take the Specimen instead. I mean, obviously you don't pick that way between cards and relics, but if they were both cards or they were both relics and you were given the choice between them, you would always be taking Corpse Explosion. It adds poison now to help boost that damage and kill enemies more quickly, and on its death, it creates the effect of its explosion. And if you're using Corpse Explosion, you really want to be going for the highest HP enemy for the most part. Maybe in some fights like Collector, you might want to, use it on the minions to kill them quicker and do a little bit more damage. But generally speaking, you're going for the highest HP fight or enemy in each fight, and you're killing all of their buddies immediately, and you don't need to wait a turn for the poison to tick and kill them. And if you've got more than 2 enemies, you're not doing it a second time. Corpse Explosion is just much more efficient at achieving essentially the same thing that this is trying to do. And wasting a rare relic on something that you could do with a card multiple times, because Corpse Explosion doesn't even exhaust. I think one thing people don't necessarily realize is that you can actually stack the corpse explosion effect. Not just the poison, but the explosion itself. And so, you know, if you're exploding an enemy that has 40 HP twice, you're doing 80 damage. Obviously, kind of situational and being able to play that quickly. But as I said, if a rare relic is worse at doing something than a card, no, that's a trash relic. No, thank you. Next up is Thread and Needle, which grants you 4 plated armor at the beginning of each combat. I'm going to put that right in the middle of C tier. It is okay. You know, I've in the past valued a lot of the block relics fairly highly because of the energy that they can save you. Especially the ship relics, things like Orichalcum, what have you. 4 plated armor is just alright. I think the game is definitely balanced in such a way that you are often unable to fully block with just 1 defend. You know, there are lots of enemies in those early fights that, you know, deal 7 damage. And it's kind of like the game design between how freemium games will say, hey, if you get 100 gems, you can, you know, pass the timer and just complete the whatever it is you're doing. But we only sell packs of gems in 75. So you need to buy 2 packs of gems. Kind of the same idea here, where you're often given a choice like, hey, do I want a full block by playing 2 block cards? Or am I willing to take a little bit of damage to play more attacks? And so what this provides is that little bit of extra block so that you don't necessarily need that second block card. You can still full block and play that attack. Unfortunately, if you are taking damage, the value of this is going to drop because it is plated armor. It's not a metallicized or anything like that. And over the course of a run, as you get higher into the Spire, I think this will have less value because of the amount of damage enemies will do. If you can get something like a Barricade or Calipers, or even like Nightmare your blurs or burst your blurs on silent, and you have a way of possibly banking a little bit of this block for future turns, that will obviously increase its value. But I'm trying to evaluate these mostly on their own. The fact that this needs a lot of support to be super useful is a detracting factor, whereas other relics are just good all by themselves. This is just okay all by itself, and that's just what it is. It's not a super exciting relic. It's not going to change how you play. It's not going to change a lot of your decision making, apart from maybe, hey, he's doing 8 damage, I can block for 5. Thread and Needle will handle the rest, so I can keep attacking. That's about as much as it will do. And it's alright in early combats, but the further you go, the less value I think it has. Next up, we have one of the silent exclusives in Tingsha. Every time you discard a card, you deal 3 damage to a random enemy. I'm going to put that right up there with Karen's Ashes. I think that you can probably most definitely get more use out of Tingsha in a given turn or a given combat than Karen's Ashes. Obviously, if you're exhausting cards, you can't exhaust them again, but you can discard the same card as many times as you want, as long as you're able to stall the fight. It is not AoE damage, but it does stack, so if you are playing something like an Acrobatics, or you're playing Prepareds, or you're playing Storm of Steels, and you're getting multiple discards, especially against single target enemies where there's no RNG involved in who is going to be taking this damage. It can be incredibly powerful. This has won me heart fights before. I have posted, I think I will post, my next video is going to be a silent run where Tingsha wins the heart fight for me, and you'll see how great it can be. Next up is Tori. Anytime you take 5 damage or less, that damage will be removed and reduced down to 1. I'm going to call that an S tier relic. Maybe I just get too excited, but I think that there are a lot of multi-attack hits, including in the heart fight, that are going to ask you to block lots of little amounts of damage. And this is fantastic at doing that. And if you combine it with tungsten, that's a dream combo. But even without tungsten, I think it is a great relic. It allows you to strategically block for less and attack more. It is similar in that way to Thread and Needle, but it will never lose its value. It is always going to be reducing the same amount of damage as long as you can get it under 5 per hit. Obviously, if it's something like Book of Stabbing, then it is always going to be doing like 7 per hit. That's a much different kind of challenge. It's not going to work the same way. But for the most part, a lot of those multi-attack hits are pretty small, and they will allow you to do a lot of blocking, especially if you can combine it with some weakened. So, very, very powerful relic. I think it will change not necessarily your pathing decisions, but definitely your play decisions per turn. And it allows you to play those attacks, spend less energy blocking, and always get the same value out of that block. You don't have the risk of taking damage and losing your plated armor like you do with the Thread and Needle. Next up is the last silent exclusive, Tough Bandages. That grants you 3 block for every card you discard per turn, and I'm going to put that right next to Tingsha. Tough Bandages is another relic that I think can potentially be run winning for you. It has an incredible value because I think no matter what kind of deck you are running, the silent always wants to be drawing and discarding anyway. Those prepareds, those acrobatics, those are kind of your bread and butter for getting to the important stuff quickly. And if you can get to the important stuff while also blocking, saving that energy, not using it for blocks so you can play that important stuff, that will really make a big difference over the course of a run. And you know, taking those calculated gambles is even easier now. I think calculated gambles are another card that you're always going to be taking just because of how good it is. And if there's something you always want and a relic can make that thing better, yeah, take it. That's a great relic. Use it. You should be definitely changing your idea of how to play and how to move forward once you get a relic like Tingsha or Tough Bandages or Karen's Ashes. They really, really incentivize you to lean even harder into that main synergy, whether it's Exhaust for Ironclad or Discard for Silent. Saying, hey, there's a thing you're already doing. This is going to make doing that better. You should do it more. Raising the ceiling instead of raising the floor. Next up, we have Tungsten Rod. Every time you take damage, you take 1 less. I'm going to put that in B tier. I think obviously this pairs just phenomenally with Tori, but it is a lot to ask to get 2 specific rare relics in the same run. I don't think you should be necessarily looking at Tungsten Rod and being like, okay, well now I just need to plan for how to get Tori. You can't force relics in the same way that you can try to force cards. You don't get as many chances to see relics. So relying on synergy between 2 rare relics is a pretty high bar. If it happens, it's amazing. It completely solves a lot of fights. But apart from that, it is just kind of a nice passive bonus. Over the course of a run, it can add up to be quite a lot. I like using mods like Spire stats or run stats or relic stats, something like that. I forget the exact name. But when you can actually look at how much damage this will block over the course of a run. How much damage will this block per floor? How much damage does it block per turn? You might be surprised that Tungsten does quite a bit of heavy lifting. And you think that only 1 damage per hit is not a lot. And it's not. I mean, it's rarely going to be the difference maker in a particular combat. But it adds up over time. And that is its main value, is just that avoiding a little bit of chip damage over the course of a run can be a hugely beneficial effect. But at the same time, it doesn't really change a lot of how you play. It doesn't really change your decision making. It doesn't really change the order that you play cards in. It's just a completely passive effect that is doing what it's doing and helping you be slightly better at whatever it is you want to do. Kind of the essence of B tier, and that, you know, you're maybe a little excited. I think I would be a little happier to see this than, you know, something like Duvu Doll or Lizard Tail. But at the end of the day, it's not a major difference maker in the decision side of playing. It can be a big difference over the course of a run in total, but turn by turn, it's not going to matter to how you function and how you play. Next up is Turnip, another passive benefit relic in that you can no longer be debuffed with Frail. So your blocking will always be predictable. Again, this is very similar to something like Ginger, and that is just an extremely passive benefit. Doesn't really change a lot of how you play. Doesn't change how you path. It gives you a little bit of value. It's really nice. I think maybe a little less valuable than Ginger because of the amount of decks that can make a good use out of it. All decks are going to be attacking for the most part. Not all decks necessarily need to be doing lots of blocking. Ironclad isn't always going to really care about block very much. It's not going to add a lot of great value to a defect deck where it's getting a lot of block from its orbs. So it has a little less value in my opinion. That's why I'm placing it slightly under Ginger. But again, you get it and you're like, okay, that's nice. Maybe I wished for something a little bit better, but you're not mad about it. You're not happy about it either. It just kind of is what it is. Unceasing Top will give you the ability to draw a card if there are no cards currently in your hand. I'm going to put this near the bottom of C tier. Maybe this is a hot take. I don't know. I feel like I often get this and it doesn't do a lot for me because I don't have enough extra energy. That could be a a sign of my own failures as a deck builder, that I'm not getting enough energy into decks quickly enough. But I also think it has some significant drawbacks. You know, there are a lot of cases where you don't want to be drawing. You know, you've only got 2 or 3 cards left in the pile. One of them is, you know, a very important card that you want to play next turn, and you might end up drawing into that when you don't have the energy to play it, and then you've got to reshuffle the deck and try and find it again, which is a very big negative in my eyes. Obviously, you have the choice and the ability not to play that last card and to make sure you're not drawing into something unnecessarily. Kind of in the same way that, you know, you can decide not to play a card with Pocket Watch because you want to have a better draw next turn. But I don't think the logic is the same. I think not playing a card now for Pocket Watch makes your next turn better. Not playing a card now because of Unceasing Top doesn't make your next turn better. It just makes your next turn not worse. If that makes any sense. You know, you're already in a situation where you're pretty much guaranteed to draw that card you want. If you play now and you draw it now, the next turn just gets worse. Drawing that card doesn't make the next turn better. Or drawing the card next turn doesn't make the next turn better. It's just what you already wanted to be doing. So it doesn't offer a lot of value in that manner. Obviously, if you're running like a claw deck on defect, this is absolutely fantastic. You can just keep drawing those 0-cost cards, you know, get those all-for-ones, get those scrapes, and just keep going. But outside of low-cost decks and decks that are perhaps busted with energy, you know, maybe you've already gotten an ice cream. Maybe you're doing like a crazy defect fusion deck, you know, whatever. If you've got lots of energy, Unceasing Top is great. But I think most of the time it's not going to have a huge effect. If you don't have extra energy, if you don't have 0-cost cards, you know, maybe you draw an extra card. Maybe you can play it, maybe you can't. I mean, there's a lot of ifs here, and I think in a situation where you've got a relic with a lot of ifs, that really lowers its value. Something like Ice Cream is always good. Something like Incense Burner is always good. Gambling Chip is always good. But when you take an Unceasing Top, you're like, well, I need to have this, and I need to do that, and then there's also this thing I want to have. Makes it a little bit harder to get the synergy going with all the different pieces of support it needs. Even if those are things you already kind of want to be doing. Like, more energy is always good, but it's not something you just always have. Next up, we have Wing Boots. I didn't know what to do with this, so I just threw it in B tier. I think it is an incredibly flexible tool that will allow you to get out of bad situations, perhaps. I think it can also be used positively. Say you already are in a really good place with your deck, and now you just want to say, hey, I'm not afraid of these elites. I want to have like a 4 elite path this act, and just load up those relics and snowball into something insane. In that way, I like it. It's versatile. You can use it for a lot of different purposes. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I just feel like it's something that sits in my relic bar, and I often struggle to figure out the best way to use it unless there's like a really, really obvious answer. Like, I'm going to die if I don't get a fire. If I go into this next combat, I'm dead. I cannot do that. I must use the Wing Boots. Maybe that's a sign of my own weaknesses in play, the same way that, you know, you don't want to hold on to gold, you don't want to hold on to potions, you don't want to hold on to Wing Boots. if you die with wing boots, you feel like an idiot because I clearly could have saved myself if I had just used this, but I didn't use it. I think it is one of those things people do tend to sit on and wait for that perfect answer, that very obvious situation where this will be very, very good, and in that way you can miss out on some opportunity value that you just didn't realize. You know, you're kind of playing that risk game where you're trying to avoid the biggest problem, or you're trying to get the most value out of it, but there's also RNG in that. You know, if you've gotten to a point where you are thinking like that and you're saying, I want to hold on to this and get the best value out of that, you know, you have a situation in mind. You know, I want to get lots of elites in a row. But you get to that Act 3 map and the elites are just not there. Or you want to get a lot of campfires in a row. But the situation that you have in mind doesn't happen. And you may have already passed by some potentially quite good, if average, quote unquote, or less beneficial, quote unquote, situations where you could have been using wing boots before that. And because you had this idea in mind of future value that you might get out of it, you didn't use it, and you ended up losing out on it. That's the vulnerability of wing boots, and I think it's an even bigger problem than not spending money. I think it's an even bigger problem than not spending potions, because a more valuable floor is going to be a better source of power and creating a better deck than perhaps a single potion on a single turn, or getting a remove at that shop that you might not have been able to afford because you've already done like 3 or 4 removes. Maybe you can get quite a bit of value from a really, really powerful shop out of an old coin, but a lot of times you roll up to a shop with old coin, you're like, this is kind of mediocre. I guess I'll take some stuff, but it's not what I really hoped for. With wing boots, a really good floor can add a lot of value really quickly. So losing out on spending those wing boots charges, I think, is significantly worse than holding on to potions or money too long. So I think the most important thing with wing boots is really just using it. Don't worry too much about the perfect situation, or, you know, using it as an emergency button to get out of something. I think it is something you want to try to spend as quickly as possible. Now, for some reason, our last Relic Stone Calendar is just not on this list. Whoever created this tier list set on the website seems to have just completely left it off. Unless I am absolutely blind and not seeing it. I've checked 5 or 6 times. I'm not seeing Stone Calendar here. I will just use Runic Pyramid as a place marker so we don't forget where it goes. And I'm going to put Stone Calendar into C tier, I guess. I don't know. I think Stone Calendar is nice when you can stall out a fight, or if you are stuck in a situation where you are always having to block, your deck is lacking damage. It's great for AoE. You know, maybe you're fighting Slime Boss or something like that. You've got a bad split. Now you got a lot of high HP slimes that are very dangerous. That can save you in that case. But in general, it's just something I get, you know, like, I kind of forget I have it until it makes a difference. I think we've all had instances where we forget about Stone Calendar, and we think we're about to die, and then it pops off for 52 damage, and we survive. Like, oh shit, thank you, great, yes. But I think most of the time it's not doing that. Most of the time you are killing enemies before turn 7 if things are going well. Maybe you're doing a block deck and you're stalling out, but even so, like, that 50 damage once is not something that you should be really building around, even if it can provide value for AoE fights. The higher up the Spire you get, the higher HP the bosses are going to have. Doing 50 damage to a big head or, you know, something like that just doesn't make the same amount of difference than it does, you know, if you're fighting an Act 2 hallway fight or something like that. So the value of it does kind of fall off as enemy HP gets higher as you get into more one enemy fights. I think some of the toughest fights in Act 3 are one enemy combats, whether it's, you know, Time Eater or Big Head or Nemesis or Transient. All of those fights, you're not going to be mad about having 50 damage on turn 7. I don't know. Does Transient even get to turn 7? I don't think it does, but you see what I'm saying. Against a single high HP enemy, 50 damage is never bad, but it's also not something that's really going to be your number one priority when you're thinking about crafting a deck, pathing, playing cards per turn. Doesn't make a huge difference. And I think that's kind of where C tier relics live, and that they are nice bonuses, but they don't really change how you're going to be doing things, or they potentially have a fairly negative downside. They are extremely situational in their usefulness, but it's not bad. It's just something that I get, and I'm like, all right, could have been better, could have been worse. It'll be good a couple of times this run. It'll help me get out of something, you know, it'll jam, but not gonna win you a run. So that is the rare relic tier list, in my opinion. Obviously, this is just kind of what I feel about my play style. I'm very intuitive, and I tend to like to play aggressively. I like Ironclad as my main, and even other characters. I do have obviously very biased views on how I like to play them. I really like silent discard decks. I really like crazy defect powery orb decks. I'm not a huge claw fan. I obviously don't value a lot of Watcher decks very highly, apart from Infinites and Divinity decks. I think there's just not enough support for different kinds of decks within the Watcher card pool to make a lot of those Scry decks viable, or, you know, pressure points obviously doesn't have anything going for it aside from pressure points. But you probably have different feelings than me. If so, if you think I got something totally wrong, I am very, very open. Like, I think a lot of these B tier relics, you know, Champion's Belt, Captain Wheel, Emotion Chip, I think you could make some very, very good arguments for raising them. But B tier is just kind of where I put a lot of the, I don't know, it's good, I guess. No real downsides, but perhaps not something that's going to change your run. Maybe I'm missing something completely. Let me know in the comments. And thanks for sticking around to the end. Thanks for watching. This Saturday, I will be putting out a new silent run. I think it will just be the Act 4. I was playing kind of just for fun one night and didn't even turn the recording on until I got to Act 4. So it'll be a shorter video. I don't want to replay the entire seed just to show you what it is. And I think maybe having a nice short 10-minute video will be a little more digestible than a full run. So look out for that silent deck I'm going to have on Saturday. It's a real fun one. Makes great use of Tingsha and calculated gambles. And I get a really exciting heart win on my highest ascension yet. So stay tuned for more Slay the Spire coming at you real soon from Ruckus Gaming.